see you. Hey, thanks very much for coming. Good.
The Dead Zone is a classic Stephen King adaptation, and I think what's great about that film is Greg Stillson may be the scariest character in Stephen King history. He's just a really frightening guy because he's so placid. How did you feel about that role as sort of playing the sort of like ultimate evil politician?
Playing Greg Stillson, I didn't really have to stretch very far. I mean, we've had some of those lunatics reach very high levels in public life, public service, that have given us second thoughts.
We have a diplomatic solution.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Secretary, the missiles are flying.
Playing that screwball was actually a lot of fun. I didn't realize the effect it could have on a lot of people, maybe for the better, when they realize if you get into high public office, you're carrying some pretty important responsibility, and you better be a responsible person. Didn't we just learn that from a recent occupant of the highest office in the land?
I always think of the end when he lifts the kid up and into the sniper's sights to save himself. It's a great scene.
Well, he met his demise when he showed his cowardice when he was being fired at and grabbed a little child to protect himself. And in the movie, the man that took the photograph that ended up destroying him was my son, Ramon. He was that kid with the tricolored hair with the camera on the scene and snapped that photograph that led to Stillson's demise. Yeah, so keep an eye on your kids.
I got a chance to talk with Martin Sheen recently, and we talked a bit about Dead Zone and that character, Greg Stillson, being so horrifying as a sort of placid evil. What can you say about directing him at that time, and what politicians were you commenting on with that character in the 80s?
It was a character invented by Stephen King, of course, but it turned out to be very George Bush-like, and then even more very Donald Trump-like, as it turns out. So unfortunately, you invent kind of monsters and they pop up. You know, I blame Stephen. It's his fault. I'm going to blame him for Bush and Trump. Okay, how about that?
Is that a film you look back on fondly, The Dead Zone? Is that something that was an important film for you at the time?
Well, yeah, Dead Zone. I mean, it was important because it was the first time I did an adaptation of a book. So that was an interesting creative experience. And then working with someone's work who's as popular as Stephen King, it was really a first for me. I'd been writing my own stuff before that. It wasn't quite a studio picture. It was really for Dino De Laurentiis, but it was for a studio, Paramount, and so that was an interesting experience as well.
You're a liar!
No, what kind of talk is that from a nice little girl like you?
Go to hell!
The year after Dead Zone, you were in another Stephen King adaptation, Firestarter, with Drew Barrymore. Was that a fun one to shoot? It's very different than Dead Zone.
Yeah, well, you know, one of my idols and dearest friends, George C. Scott, was the villain in that one, well, the two of us were villains in that one, and it was always a great pleasure to work with George. And we were introduced to this little girl who was quite extraordinary. Miss Barrymore followed her career and her status, extraordinary talent, and I watch her now in the afternoon talk show. So I'm delighted because she went through some really rough patches in her life, even as a young girl when she was thrust into stardom. And it's never a good idea to impose that on a child. And she was deeply affected by it. And thank God she got through it. And working with her was, I mean, it's very disarming. You were talking to her, I mean, I think she was 5 or 6 when we did the film, and it was like talking to I won't say an adult, but I would say a very aware person. She had this lovely personality. She was so disarming, and I'd see her every now and then at different events, and I saw her heal and come back, and here she is for us to see nearly every day, and more power to her. God love her. A very special young lady.